excuse me, Earth in the Balance almost 30 years ago. It's hard to believe, Al. It can't be that long ago. But after Al left office, he traveled the world presenting a slideshow on the impacts and solutions to the climate crisis. Against all odds, that unlikely subject became wildly watched and watched by everyone, critically acclaimed documentary, and called The Inconvenient Truth. And it was awarded, and I think it's so amazing, Al, awarded the Nobel Prize in 2007 for your efforts to raise the world's attention to the existential threat of our time, climate change. And I introduced one in a very small way. I introduced one of the first ever bills in the Congress calling for us acknowledging that we had to deal with climate change when we were serving together in the U.S. Senate. With President Obama, I was proud to oversee, and with some Al's input, the largest investment in clean energy in the history of our nation, $90 billion out of the Recovery Act. And there's so much work that needs to be done, so much more. And Donald Trump has ignored the science, and he's literally taken us backwards and the whole world with it. This issue is personal to me. You know, when I was a kid, when he moved from Scranton, Pennsylvania out to Delaware, I moved to a little steel town called Claymont, Delaware. And you're very familiar with this because we've talked about it. Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania has more oil refineries along the Delaware River for the Delaware Valley of 10 million people than even down in Houston. And when we first moved there, we went to a little school about I guess it was about 20 blocks as you'd walk it, and up what they call the Philadelphia Pike. But the Philadelphia Pike was before I-95 and it was kind of busy, so we couldn't walk as kids. I was going in the third grade, and so my mother used to drive us up. And when it got to be a little colder and the first frost, you'd get in the car in the apartments we lived in, turn on the windshield wipers, there'd actually be an oil slick in the windows.
Wow.
Literally not a joke. And Delaware on average is only 3 feet above sea level. So this is personal to me from the time I'm a kid to now. Look, going to fight for, this is all about our grandkids. We're just talking about our grandkids for our families, and hammered by superstorms and pollution. And for upside, the upside of this is there's good jobs out there. We're going to be able to create a lot of good jobs. But I should stop talking, Alan, because I want to ask you a question. You've been working on this issue for a long time. Why is climate change so important in this election?
Well, first of all, thank you, Joe, for this conversation today and for the dialogue we've been having on climate. I'm really excited about your campaign. And to answer your question, I never realized when I was young that this issue of the climate crisis would, kind of take over my life the way it has. I didn't even major in science, but like a lot of students these days, I had the freedom to sample some courses in other disciplines. And I walked into a course taught by a great climate scientist named Roger Revelle back in the 60s. And he was the first scientist to chart out the measurement of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. And that's what really opened my eyes to this 50-something years ago. And I kept in touch with my professor and asked him to be the first witness in that first congressional hearing on climate. And I started to try to figure out how to translate what he was saying in scientific language into the kind of words that I could understand and therefore could communicate with others. And I've watched all these years, Joe, since the crisis has grown exactly as Professor Revelle predicted that it would. And, the study just came out yesterday that this year of 2020 is more likely than not 75% chance of being the hottest year ever measured in world history. Already 19 of the 20 hottest have been in the last 19 years. And we're seeing so much heat trapped in the Earth's atmosphere by the global warming pollution. We're putting another 152 million tons up there every day worldwide, and it stays there on average about 100 years. The scientists will tell you the math is complicated, but they say that figure is good to use. And every day it traps as much extra heat as would be released by 500,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding in the Earth's atmosphere.
That's incredible.
Every day. It's incredible, and it's disrupting the water cycle, causing rain bombs. 20 million acres couldn't be planted in the Midwest last year because of all of the rain bombs and downpours and floods. And we're seeing sea level rise and the big drought, especially in the Southwest and in many places around the world. Stronger storms. The oceans are the hottest they've ever been this year, and many scientists are worried the hurricanes will be stronger still. And so the list of disasters has been accumulating. And yet there is good news, and we'll have a chance to get into that, I'm sure, with renewable energy and electric vehicles and batteries and efficiency and regenerative agriculture and all that. But we need policy changes. And that means we need to change some of the policy makers, particularly the one in the White House right now. And that's why I am so proud to endorse your candidacy, Joe. I was saying earlier today, if I was talking to one person who had not yet decided who to vote for in this upcoming election, I would just say plainly and simply, this is not complicated. If you care about the climate crisis, if you want to start solving the climate crisis, this is not rocket science. This is the most consequential choice in a presidential election that we've ever had in American history. Donald Trump is the face of climate denial globally. He is lifting the constraints on polluters, putting more pollution into the atmosphere, making all these changes to all of the protections that we do now have, and we need more. And so your election is absolutely crucial, Joe, and I want to do everything I can to convince everybody that cares about the climate crisis, particularly those people, that this is a no-brainer. This is a real simple choice. And if anybody has any doubt about that, come talk to me.
Well, Al, thanks so much. It means a lot to me. I often say beating Trump won't end climate change, but it's a critical first step. Last week, Trump reversed the rule requiring power plants to reduce the amount of mercury and other pollutions that are pumping into the air. Pollution that is bad for human health, to state the obvious. And it's wrong. It's a step backwards. And as we try to seek some progress, he's eviscerating the EPA and everything that's out there. But particularly dangerous is now, I believe, for communities of color. Communities suffered disproportionately during this global health crisis. We're seeing it happen now. And one reason for the disproportionate impact is air pollution, linked up to 15% increase in COVID-19 mortality and those most vulnerable. Look, people of color are more likely to live in communities with air pollution. Just one example, the environmental injustice in Delaware. As I said, we get it and we can identify. That's why we have one of the highest cancer rates. Anyway, I don't want to get into too much about Delaware, but the United States of America, you shouldn't be poisoned by the air you breathe, the water you drink, the walls in your homes or your school. That's why we need to invest in infrastructure to make sure that every city, every home, every school has clean water. We shouldn't have it shouldn't be more likely to breathe poisoned air and drink poisoned water based on your zip code or the color of your skin. So my question, Al, is, we need to act on climate. We need to address the environmental injustices that hold back too many communities of color across the country. What's the top action we should be doing to address this environmental injustice? Not just dealing overall with the environment, but the injustice, the way it falls on certain communities.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you talking about that as eloquently as you do, Joe. It's crucially important. And you mentioned that study that came out 10 days ago. There was another one 3 months ago that went back and looked at the Great Flu in 1918, 1919, and they found that there was a 20 to 25% increase in the death rate in counties that had even a moderately higher coal burning rate. And right now, during this pandemic, counties that are majority African American have a 3 times higher infection rate with COVID-19 than counties with a majority white population. And they have a 6 times higher death rate from COVID-19. 19. Now, as you know, there are many factors, unequal access to health care. Sometimes the housing conditions that contribute, the kinds of jobs that many African Americans have aren't friendly with Zoom in from home. There are a lot of factors, but the environmental injustice factors are really key to this, because as Dr. Robert Buller down at Texas Southern has showed in his pioneering studies, and Reverend William Barber II has campaigned against, African American communities, also Hispanic and Native communities, are way more likely to live downwind from the smokestacks and downstream from the hazardous waste flows and adjacent to the coal ash sites and the hazardous chemical waste sites. And this has a huge effect. One other statistic that's really shocking to me, Joe, if you look at the death rate for African American children from asthma, it's 10 times higher than the death rate from asthma for Caucasian children. Now, some of that was true well before this current set of circumstances, but we have to realize that the burning of fossil fuels and the air pollution that results is a precondition for a higher death rate from COVID-19. And worldwide, even before this, 9 million people were being killed every year by fossil fuel burning air pollution. So we have got to fix that as we also address the need for better access to health care and fix the other inequities that are also contributing to this injustice.
Well, by the way, I don't want to get off on it now, but one of the things that the Navajo Nation is being devastated right now. I've met with the president, we know him, and they're getting virtually no help. But that's another issue. It's a gigantic issue, but it goes to this whole. One of the things I'm hoping now is I'm hoping that it's kind of like the way this administration has dealt with the COVID pandemic, as well as the environment, has sort of taken the blinders off of people. People now are looking and saying, my Lord, you mean that same person who kept my sewer open and my basement not flooding, the same person that made sure that I got pulled out of that car crash? You mean the same person who, when I have trouble, comes to take care of my home, was burning down? Those people, they're the ones who, in fact, are getting screwed? Well, I think here's the question. Look, I think this resonates with an awful lot of people now, many of whom it didn't resonate before, not because they didn't care, but they didn't focus on it. They didn't realize the consequence. My question is, and often gets, as it relates to climate change, you hear politicians talk about this one of the questions, addressing climate change, and that they can create real jobs. And that we can turn this from a very big negative into a potential positive. Is that true, you think?
Oh, there's no question in my mind, Joe. And I've seen it in the business and investing world. It's happening all over. Let me frame it up this way. We've had a lot of discussion about the similarities between this coronavirus pandemic and the climate crisis. And the biggest similarity is we see with the pandemic the danger of ignoring the scientists' warnings until it's almost too late. And that's the exact parallel with the climate crisis. But there's some differences also. Secretary General of the U.S., Antonio Guterres, said just a few days ago, the consequences of the climate crisis won't last 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, but for centuries. And it's just unbearable to imagine that years from now, future generations will ask themselves, why didn't they act back in the year 2020? And you're determined to do it. But now here's one of the big differences. In order to solve this pandemic, we've had to see these social distancing measures and other things that have shut down some economic activity. And that's what the doctors and scientists say have flattened the curve, as they say, and helped us get on the road out of this. But it's exactly the opposite where the climate crisis is concerned, because in order to solve the climate crisis, we don't have to shut down the economy. We need to turn the valves wide open on jobs, installing solar panels and wind farms and building electric vehicles and batteries and introducing regenerative agriculture to help farmers and sequester carbon in the soil and planting trees and retrofitting all these buildings, which is a win-win-win proposition. We are in the early stages of a sustainability revolution in our world right now, empowered by some of the new digital technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence that are giving executive teams and business the ability to manipulate protons and electrons and atoms and molecules with the same proficiency that the IT companies have demonstrated in managing bits of information. And the companies that are making commitments to sustainability and becoming far more efficient and reducing their global warming pollution are turning out to be way more profitable and creating new jobs. The number one fastest growing job in the U.S. economy for the last 5 years has been solar panel installer, growing 5 times faster than the average job rate growth. Second fastest growing job is wind turbine technician. And there are many others that are coming in on that list as well. We can retrofit the buildings, commercial, industrial, homes, all across in every community in the country, create tens of millions of new jobs, and it can be paid for with the lower energy bills that start coming in right after the retrofit has been finished. So this is the biggest job creating opportunity in the history of the country, history of the world. And it happens to come right at the time when your term as president, God willing, begins, we will need to really supercharge sustainable growth by creating tens of millions of these new jobs. And there they are to be created.
And they are. And I tell you what, Al, in large part because you opened everybody's eyes worldwide to this a while ago. Look, climate change is a threat, but I think it's a gigantic opportunity. Everybody has different proposals. I ask you to take a look at mine, but the $1.7 trillion plan, I have to invest $1 trillion in green infrastructure right off the bat. You know, we can transform the country. Just imagine 500,000 new charging stations on every highway that exists or every new highway built. We can own the electric power, and we can own the electric vehicle market. We can create millions of good. And by the way, the jobs we're talking about are not minimum wage jobs. They're jobs that pay 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks an hour with benefits. These are real jobs. They're union jobs in many cases. We have to improve energy efficiency. If we can cut the carbon footprint of U.S. buildings in half by 2035. And you know the numbers better than I do. We had this big fight about tax credits for renewable energy, solar and wind. New battery technologies, modernizing the electric grid, which I really need your help on. We're working on that's a gigantic potential breakthrough if that happens and when it happens. We're investing $400 billion in new energy research and development. That's more than we took to send a man to the moon. And almost every expert, starting with you, points out that creates 10 million good-paying jobs. And, you know, it's the fastest growing jobs, as you said, are solar installers and wind turbine engineers. And, you know, and by the way, Donald Trump is really the stable genius, indicated that windmills cause cancer. That was news to me, and everybody in Iowa and everywhere else around the country is doing this. But, you know, I mean, hey, come on. You know, I visited a solar, and you've done this all around the world, in Techen solar plant outside Las Vegas. The IBW workers at Techen are making $60,000 a year. Clean energy was the engine of recovery from the Great Recession. When the president asked me to get engaged in dealing with the Recovery Act, you know, it's going to be even bigger now, a bigger engine in terms of recovery from this economic storm that we're going through right now. And it's logical and it's rational. And so one of the things that I think is happening now, you pointed out that American business is realizing they've got to price in the they have to price in the price of carbon. And the way they're doing, they are looking at their bottom line and reduce carbon. Well, you got the major unions in the country have endorsed me. They now realize this transition is going to happen. It's happening anyway, and they should own it. They should be the people who, in fact, have the access to these new, good-paying union jobs. And so, look, I'm getting too excited about this, but look,
that's appropriate, man.
Look, other major countries around the world that are polluters as well. We make up 15% of the problem, and 85% is, quote, over there. How would you make sure addressing climate change is a global priority? Because this president's obviously walked away from what's what's going on.
Yeah, first of all, let me make a quick comment on the jobs figures that you used. You're right on. The great Wayne Gretzky is famous for saying, "I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going to be."
Yeah.
And that saying applies to this process of change that's underway right now. We got used to what the business people call a cost reduction curve when the era of computer chips began and flat screen TVs and LED lights. Well, that cost reduction curve is happening with solar and wind and EVs and batteries and so many other technologies. 5 years ago, Joe, electricity from solar and wind was cheaper than electricity from burning fossil fuels in only 1% of the world. A short 5 years later, now, electricity from renewables is cheaper than electricity from fossil fuels in 2/3 of the world.
That's
and
right.
5 years from now, after the end of your first term, again, God willing, it will be cheaper in 100% of the world. Last year, calendar year 2019, if you look at all of the new electricity generation built and installed in the world as a whole, 72% of it was renewables. Now it is, in many places, it's cheaper to take the fossil fuel plants, even if they've been fully depreciated, and just shut them down and replace them with new wind and solar. EVs already are growing in popularity, and the business statistics show within 2 years, they're going to be significantly cheaper than internal combustion engine vehicles. The nation of India has already announced that they're going to make it illegal to sell internal combustion engines within 10 years. Many other countries are taking similar steps. We need to make sure the jobs of the future with making these EVs and the other technologies are here in the U.S. So it takes U.S. leadership. And to your question, yes, the United States is still the indispensable nation. We are still in a period of history, in spite of China and India growing and all of that. The U.S. is the only nation that can really provide policy leadership in the world. And our country has abdicated that in the last 3.5 years. As you know, the restoration of that leadership is essential. A lot of people don't realize that when Donald Trump said he wanted to pull out of the international agreement on climate, the Paris Agreement, he can't do that until one day after this upcoming presidential election. And then you, again, God willing, when you're inaugurated, 30 days later, you can put us right back in the Paris Agreement, and you can rally the other nations of the world to once again follow U.S. leadership. And the benefits of doing so are ever more obvious with the job creation opportunities we've talked about, reducing pollution so that they don't have to wait for a pandemic to see the blue sky, so that they can get rid of these health consequences of all the fossil fuel pollution. The world is ready to move. It just requires U.S. leadership of the kind you're promising to bring.
Well, Al, one of the things you and I worked on when we served in the Senate was arms control and nuclear proliferation. One of the things that I would do, and again, I'm not being solicitous when I say this, but hopefully if I get elected with your help, is I would call within 100 days of being, first I'd immediately rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, and I'd hold it there. And secondly, I would make sure that we end up in a situation where we call the major polluters in the world to a meeting in Washington, D.C., immediately, within the first 100 days, just like we did on dealing with nuclear proliferation, and directly engage these leaders in a major carbon emitting nations, that to persuade them they have to make a bigger, one section of that agreement says that after 5 years, we're going to take a look and see what we have to up the ante on the commitments we've all made. And so we have to up the ante now. And there's a lot of major polluters out there now that we walked away. You know, Donald Trump talks about America first, or he's made America alone. We used to lead by example and by passing a climate plan and the targets and mechanisms to and this to make sure we hold other people accountable to the standard we have. One thing I get, if this you would have done if you had been president a long time ago, but look what's happening now. We have a circumstance where the Chinese have their Belt and Road Initiative, but they're outsourcing pollution all over the world. Coal, more coal, and they're saying we're not doing it at home. That doesn't work. But flip it another way. Look what's going on in Brazil. I've been there a bunch. You have too. The entire, they're burning the Amazon. Why? Because they need agricultural space. They want to grow, et cetera. And when I've talked to them in the past, they say, you guys did it. Why can't we do it? Well, one of the things you were one of the leaders on, along with a couple other people that Dick Lugar and others, remember we passed that bill saying we're going to forgive debt for forest? If you, in fact, don't cut down your forest, we'll forgive the debt. Well, if you were president or I were president or Barack was still president, what he'd be doing is he'd be calling the president of Brazil, organizing the rest of the world and say, we're going to give you $20 billion to stop burning it. Stop burning. And if you do that, you can find other avenues to grow your economy because that's the largest carbon sink in the world. As you've pointed out before, and I don't know all the facts, all the numbers as well as you, but my recollection is more carbon is absorbed from the atmosphere in the Amazon, locked into the ground, than all the carbon emitted, the pollution emitted in the United States on a daily basis. It's a gigantic carbon sink. It absorbs, it does more to help the environment than if we stopped every single bit of carbon going in the air. And look what's happening. We're not organizing, and if we don't organize the world, who organizes it? Who organizes it? And so there's so much, I think, anyway, look, one more question here. Is it too late to address the climate change in a meaningful way? By that, I mean, can we still make the kind of impact in time to save the environment and to make sure that our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids are going to see blue skies, breathe clean air, and in fact be in a situation that is fundamentally different than the direction it's going now?
Well, the short answer that I get from the scientists who I rely on the most and who I trust the most, the short answer is yes. The more textured answer, Joe, is that we have to be honest that some damage has been done.
Yeah.
And enough heat has been absorbed now that some of the big ice sheets are going to continue to melt, and we're going to have to adapt to sea level rise and in a number of areas in the U.S. as well as low-lying impoverished countries as well. And there's other damage that's been done, but it's nothing compared to what we would have to deal with if we don't get this under control in short order. And yes, we now have the opportunity to turn the corner. And for anybody who is discouraged about the possibility that we can still solve this, remember that the will to act is itself a renewable resource. And the late Nelson Mandela, you think about what he faced on